All right, welcome back to another episode of the Christian Sages. What's going on, Douglas?
Not too much.
Not too much. Did you watch Kingdom of Heaven this week?
Oh, was that the one?
That was the one.
Yeah, I fell asleep and then I rewound it 30 minutes and watched the end of it.
You rewound it, so hey, you're actually watching like the old school video there.
Oh yeah. I still have that lingo, I guess.
It's crazy. I do too. I say the same thing, like I rewound it, or
Yeah, video recorder, video something.
I watched. I mean, we still call them videos. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Even online, like, oh, I'm watching a video, or I uploaded a video. But it's, I mean,
it gets stuck in you, man.
It does. It does. I mean, technically, it was a videotape, so a video is what you taped. So I guess you could use the term video. So, did you enjoy Kingdom of Heaven? Or did you have... the thing is, I did enjoy it. And obviously, the first time I saw it, I thought it was a fantastic movie. I really loved it. But it's extremely historically inaccurate.
Yeah. I thought it was... Like, the first time I saw it, I thought it was pretty good. I kind of felt like it was shallow, but...
Yeah.
The second time I watched it, I watched the director's cut.
I heard the director's cut's a lot better.
It actually is. It's still really annoying because this time I was watching it more, picking out the historical inaccuracies and sort of looking things up. So it wasn't like I was watching it for entertainment and enjoyment. So what's irritating to me is that most of the stuff where people say, well, it's entertainment, it's art, it's not historical. Hollywood's not trying to teach you history. I understand that. But what they change is often doesn't really add to anything. It could have been much better done if they were to be historically accurate, or at least try to be.
Yeah, but I guess... go ahead, sorry.
Yeah, so I mean, just a bunch of things. I guess I'll wait for you to start because I don't want to just jump in the middle of it.
Go ahead, man. I mean, I think for one, those of you who are listening, if you do follow us, we are starting some different series. We have one where we're doing generations, where we're going to be discussing the state of the church with every kind of generation. We had Jonathan Dutcher in our last episode. It was kind of like a introduction to the series. We'll probably interview him again. He's having a new baby, so he really hasn't had any time, and my brother's just got a lot going on with the church. And, I just haven't asked anybody else yet to come on the show, but we will in the future have more people on. But we're also going to start doing some different things like book reviews. We're going to start doing more interviews. We're definitely going to start doing some film reviews. And this one in particular, what we're kind of going for is the idea that Hollywood really takes a lot of liberties with history, but there's an agenda behind it. It isn't just because they're trying to tell a better story. I'd actually listened to quite a few videos on how accurate this movie was, and as far as history, the inaccuracies or the accuracies of the historical accuracies on this film. And most of them were like, oh, well, you can see why he made this decision. Was to try and, further the story along. No, it really wasn't to try to further the story along. There's a specific agenda that is being told here and that you can see in Hollywood, and particularly over the last couple of years. I mean, Disney bought Star Wars and completely destroyed Star Wars with their political agenda. They are doing that to Marvel as well to some degree. They did it in the comics, and now they're moving that into the movies. They did it with Star Trek, and they've done it with Doctor Who. So all of these independent properties and all of these fandoms that really were built over quite a few years, at least 20 years or more if you're talking about Doctor Who and Star Wars, and even Star Trek, 40 years worth of fandom here or more. And they've taken them and they've run them into the ground. Stuff that was a guaranteed moneymaker that people were going to go out and they were going to like and they were going to be talking about are now, people don't care anymore because they've been run into the ground through political agenda. And you can see that in a lot of historical movies when it comes to Hollywood, where they're trying to force their political ideology, their morality of the modern postmodernism of the millennial view of life onto the historical scene. You see that with they just did BBC did a version of Troy, they called it, which was pretty much the Iliad, and they made Achilles a black guy. Now, I'm not a racist because I don't think that there should be a black guy, but during that time period, Achilles was a Greek. He would not have been a black guy. So you're forcing your agenda on there to make it seem like, oh, well, look, it was this multicultural view of life even back then, and it wasn't. It just wasn't. And you can see that very much in this movie. You agree with me, Doug?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, the biggest problem, I mean, you kind of hit a lot of things there, but the biggest problem with that is it's distorting history and making it into what they want us to believe.
Exactly.
So if you're going to take a bunch of historical characters with historical events that actually happened in historical locations and even have some half-truths mixed in, what you're doing is you're completely just driving this, like you said, agenda.
Absolutely.
And what you're doing is taking all these anachronisms into what is considered a historical movie about the Crusades.
Yes.
And you're mischaracterizing everything. You're mischaracterizing the people. You're making Knights Templar. You're making Hospitallers and Templars into these wishy-washy, non-devout, sort of moderate, pluralistic. Basically
absolutely.
a 21st century postmodern
multi-religious idealism.
And it's complete garbage because it's completely untrue and unjust to the 12th century.
Well, even I listened to one review and they said that if you can see, for instance, Guy Dion, whatever the guy's name is, it's actually Guy, but in French it's pronounced Guy, the one who ended up becoming king because he married the princess. He wasn't a Templar, and he's wearing a Templar's uniform throughout the entire movie. Right. And they're using the big red cross with the white and the big red cross because that's the most noticeable Templar order. It was not all Templar orders actually wore that. And it was given to all the bad guys on purpose to distinguish them from the others. There were actually Hospitallers in there that wore Hospitaller uniforms, but they were done on purpose with different colors to try and separate the villains from the good guys. And the villains were all this quintessential view of what a Templar is. But the reality of it is a nobleman could not be a Templar. That was the whole point of it. You had to be a monk. You had to give up your world, your life. You couldn't own lands. You couldn't be a lord or a king and be a Templar. It didn't.
Right.
So for them to have made these guys, the other guy there, his cohort, his right hand man with the red beard, who ended up, the guy who was, causing all the raids. I can't remember his name either. I
can't remember his name, but he played in Braveheart, didn't he?
He did. But in real life, there is a character like that, and he did do something. He did raid. He was known as being a pretty horrible person, but he wasn't a Templar.
Right.
Again, he wasn't a Templar. So you've completely... But again, we have to go back to this. It's this narrative that has been forced upon us over the last 20 years where they're restructuring history to fit a postmodern narrative. So... Right. And go ahead.
And so this question, when you watch this movie, you have to ask what is truly insightful of this time in history and what is actually fictitious.
Yeah.
And what you notice is from the very beginning of the film, you see the text that introduces what Ridley Scott, the director, what seems to be his agenda throughout, which is Europe is backwards.
Yes.
And they're poor, and Islamic countries are wealthy, and they show this dull, right? They show this very dull and gray and bleak, the medieval times when things were dark, when in reality, all these castles that they're in that we look at today and we see these 1,000-year-old castles.
Right.
Well, they were brand new back then.
Absolutely.
And they decorated them very brightly with banners and a lot of colors. And they don't want to show that. But then when you see Europe and Christians, you see these dull, backward people who are very, very stupid idiots. Yeah, and then you look over at the West. And then you look over at the East or Muslims, and you have a very vibrant, very bright, very astute, very smart, very patient seeming people.
Right. It was
very reasonable.
And it was a stylized choice on purpose to convey that. And it's rammed home in your face throughout the entire movie.
Yeah, yeah.
But the reality of it is the 12th century Europe, the serfs or the peasants of 12th century Europe were actually living a better life than any peasant before them, certainly better than the ones that existed in the Islamic world.
Right.
As a matter of fact, it's considered the time of the rise of the middle class, and there's a Reformation name for it, like a 12th century Reformation or Enlightenment, and so this idea that we were just these backwater Christian oppressed people that were unenlightened and were terrible, and they just were starving and hurting each other, which is part of the narrative he starts the movie off with, which is also a false narrative. It's not true. These people were not going to the Crusades to find another life. They did not go there because they thought that their world was horrible. They went there because as a direct result of Islamic aggression. I mean, before this, they'd even made their way into Spain and France. They'd conquered their way into Spain and France. So they, as a matter of fact, there was one scholar I was listening to who said the Christians, this idea that Christians are warrior people that just want to kill everybody is not true. As a matter of fact, as the Christians of the time said that killing an infidel, because you had that one guy shouting, "If you kill an infidel, it's not considered a sin; it's the path to heaven." That's not actually what they preached. They believed that killing an infidel was an unfortunate result. They didn't want to do that. They wanted to save the infidel, not kill them. They did not want to fight. The reality of it is that they could not solve this with diplomacy because Saladin wouldn't have anything to do with it. He wanted to fight. They wanted to fight. So the reality was they felt that the only option they had was crusade.
Right. And here's something, Jay, that I was thinking about. When you look at the Crusades, it's really a synonym today with Christian violence, Western imperialism.
Yeah.
Anything that is evil and proof that Christianity is ultimately just greedy. There's no truth in it. It's just a greedy religion about dominating and taking over the world. And that's what the Crusades are portrayed as. And people have this hatred about it. And what you have, though, is there's something that there's really three reasons that I wrote down why I believe there's this negative view of the Crusades and there's this really misunderstanding of history. One, first of all, and we can get into each one of these, but miseducation would be one. Students are taught one-sided, distorted view of history. Number two, Protestants who are actually people who combat the left's spin on history, they actually don't combat this because they look at the Crusades as, well, that was Catholic and they had theologically we disagree with them. But here's the problem with that is the third reason is Christianity, an understanding of just warfare. We're not talking about whether or not we agree with the theology behind the Pope exactly. But the reason that he decided to go on the Crusades was a call for help from the Byzantine Empire that had been under attack constantly from Muslims who had taken over 2/3 in the first century of the rise of Islam. And from 700 to about 800, they had taken over about 2/3 of Christendom. Yeah. And they weren't stopping.
Oh, they weren't. Matter of fact, Saladin on his deathbed said that he wished he had killed every Christian and driven them off the face of the earth. So this idea that you could just reason with Saladin and they're portrayed that way in this movie. Christians are portrayed as unreasonable warmongers, and Islamic people are portrayed as just this reasonable people that are just trying to live peaceably in enlightenment, and the Christians just won't leave them alone. And it's just not true. It is not true. And it's not. Again, I liken it very similar to the change in narrative, the modern change in narrative on the American Civil War, to that the Southerners were all just these horrible slave owners, and all they cared about was oppressing everybody, and they were backwater idiots who didn't understand and weren't enlightened, and all they cared about was their own, was money and making money off of other people, and that's not true either. And so when you talk to a modern kid, like I talk to my kids, and I'm like, so what did you learn about the Civil War? Slavery bad, South bad. That's like all they learn. Even down south, it's not, and because they were in Tennessee and Florida, it's not like they were raised in America. They weren't raised in New York, because this narrative has to be changed to fit the socialist agenda. That it's all the whole world is about social justice warriors and trying to find every place that we can look at America and say you're bad, and that's what you see here when it comes to the church. What this is set out, and the narrative has been changed throughout the years about the Crusades because it's the only place that they can look at the Christian church, the church as a whole, not talking about a few individuals here or there, and say, look, they are just as bad as Islam. Because, look, they kill people too, and they went on crusades, and they're just as bad as Islam, and they were just killing people unwarranted, and they're just as bad. And that's really what this whole narrative is about.
Yeah, and like you said, the thing is with the education, with what we educate our young people with, they don't think critically. Like when the West is blasted, they don't ever hold up every other culture and judge it by the same standard. And we can admit that, yeah, okay, the West has done something bad. We live in a sinful world, okay? So no place is perfect.
Absolutely.
But here's the thing. The greatest problem in education, at least when it comes to history, is that students are not taught to think critically.
That's right.
How to weigh different sides, how to go back in time, understand different cultures, how people thought within their own context. And the great mistake, and probably the greatest error made in history, is called presentism, which is presentism is uncritically interpreting history through present day attitudes.
Absolutely.
It's when you interpret past events in terms of modern values and concepts.
Yeah.
So when we go back 1,000 years,
and you judge those people
in history,
and their decisions,
and we begin picking apart moral winners and losers and projecting our liberal values, our 21st century values, on people of a much different time and a much different culture. We aren't being good historians, and we aren't being fair.
That's true. Absolutely.
And that's one of the biggest issues. So there's never been a time or a culture in history, especially hundreds of years ago, that was not very militaristic.
Yeah.
And so the idea of just warfare was very important, especially to these Christians.
And they believed it was just because Christians were not known for making war. This was something kingdoms made war, sure. But Christendom, as far as a religious crusade, that was unheard of. That's not something that you find in any version of the scriptures. There is no version of the scriptures where we look around and we can justify something like that. So for them to have decided this was necessary is a big deal.
Oh, yeah. And here's the thing about it is it was not about advancing and conquering. It was about defending.
No, it was not.
It was about defending, and it was about liberating.
It was.
And you see, like I said, with the Muslims, 2/3 of Christendom was taken over. So they're backed into a corner in Europe. And then they actually sold, like you actually mentioned, they sold their lands. They actually lost things. And then they didn't go over and just stay and say, we're gonna, just to validate our point of view. They didn't go over and stay. They actually came back and they said, okay, now it's safe. Now everybody can take pilgrimages to the Holy Land. Now everybody can be safe from being...
Right. Go ahead.
Now everybody can be safe, because another thing that is not taught is that from the year 700 to our own time, Muslim countries have constantly enslaved people, including there's estimated 112 million African deaths from slavery, because the Muslims would drive a very hard type of slavery where they would actually castrate the males. They didn't want them reproducing.
Absolutely.
Because they were just going to come in and they were going to take whoever else they wanted.
Right. Go ahead. Sorry.
Because they were just going to come in and take over whoever else they wanted. So they had a very harsh lifestyle. But you don't hear anybody calling them for reparations because, like I said, they castrated them. So they just wanted the slaves, and when they were done with them, they would die, and they would bring in more.
Oh, I mean, that was one of the things, that was part of their culture. It still is to some degree. And the idea that slavery in Christendom, as a matter of fact, that's one of the other historical inaccuracies. When he first meets Saladin's general there, and he chooses not to kill him, and he says, I don't take slaves, I was almost a slave, I don't take slaves, I don't suffer anyone to take slaves. That is accurate to some degree, but inaccurate in that he wasn't a slave, because Christians, when they did take slaves, they were not known for it, because they didn't want them. They cost money to feed, they don't want to take slaves, they don't need slaves. So if they did take slaves, what they did was they ransomed them. They would ransom them back.
Oh, yeah.
That's what they would use them for. And if they were a slave and they couldn't ransom them, they didn't stay a slave for very long. They eventually would just let them go because they didn't have any need of them. The culture was not a slave culture because slavery in Christianity is not an idea. It's not an idea that works in Christianity in any fashion, even Catholicism. So, but it does in Islam. So, so this idea that Christians were taking Islamic slaves is not true. Now, yes, I will say one thing that is accurate that they do talk about that I didn't necessarily like, but during the First Crusade when they did take the Holy Land back, they did pretty much kill everybody. So the idea that they did really go in and just slaughter people like wholesale, but then this idea that Saladin
they slaughtered most. They didn't slaughter all, but I'm not going to make a defense there.
No, but what I'm saying is they did do a lot of slaughtering. It wasn't like they didn't go in and kill a bunch of people. They did. Because they were responding and they were angry and they needed to liberate. So they did kill, and they did kill people that they probably shouldn't have. Because that's war, and people will get killed in war that don't deserve to get killed. The innocent will be killed. But this idea that Saladin is like, I'm going to let everybody live in Jerusalem when he takes Jerusalem, he's going to let everybody live. That's a load of crap. That didn't happen. Saladin wouldn't have let everybody live. He would have done the same thing he did with everybody else. You either convert or die. That whole idea, again, was just put there to portray that Islamic people are reasonable and enlightened, and we Christians and Europeans are all just backwater, horrible people. That's, we're not enlightened and we're just backwater and dumb and we just kill people for no reason. And that's simply not the case. And that whole movie, that is the way these knights, I always hate this because the Knights Templar have had a bad reputation for a long time now. And it's just a load of garbage. Knights Templar were not bad people. And the reputation they did get as being bad was because Philip, the king of France, owed them so much money he didn't want to pay him. So he hunted them all down and killed them and made them heretics. Seriously. I stopped
writing down the things that happened that would have never happened, starting with one of the first scenes is some knight with braided hair, right?
Absolutely.
So he comes in with braided hair. And then he wipes his mouth.
On his hair.
Right?
Yeah.
With his hair, yeah. That was, I think, one of the ones I watched that reviewed it was Real Crusades History.
Yes, that was the one I watched that one too.
Yeah, that guy does a fantastic job.
I've been listening. 2 historians on there too. That
that lady and
awesome.
Yeah, exactly. But they basically break this down and they talk about how he, first of all, they didn't make too much about his hair being braided, but him wiping his mouth is just to show pretty much how nasty and backwards.
Right. Exactly.
This night was
exactly.
And those are some of the most
simple backwater because we're Europeans and we're not, and the Islamic people are all just so enlightened.
And here's the thing too, that I think it was the same guy pointed out at one point that what irritated him about Ridley Scott was Ridley Scott actually showed the movie to a bunch of Muslims before letting it out.
Yeah.
And to get their approval and make sure that they weren't angry about it.
Right.
Of course, he wouldn't do that with Christians, but
of course not, because the Christians are all portrayed, the Templars are all portrayed as terrible, horrible people.
And the thing is, if you want to portray the
priest in the beginning, where I cut your wife's head off and stole her cross, and you know what I'm saying? Like seriously. I mean, come on, how much of a caricature can you make somebody? That was so awfully done. So unrealistic.
At what point did you ever feel proud of a Christian or inspired by?
Never, because all the ones that were supposed Christians, even that one knight, the guy who played in Harry Potter, I can't remember his name, and he ends up getting beheaded, and they show his head in the piles. Even him, who was like the most devout of all of them, was still pretty much an atheist. Because he was like, I don't buy into religion anymore, which no Templar would ever have said that in that time period. They don't buy into religion. This postmodernistic, cynical idea on religion did not exist. It would not have existed in any of them. Not even people that have fought in the Crusades.
Yeah, they were extremely... And here's the thing. You can hate this or you can love it, but they were extremely devout.
Absolutely.
Disciplined, very, very religious. They were true believers. Yes, they believed in their cause. They believed in the Crusades to defend and to fight for the innocent.
particularly
yeah,
a Templar. I mean, come on. I mean,
absolutely.
if you're just talking about some Joe Blow, okay, some serf who got forced into fighting or something, I could see that. Like, I don't buy into religion because it really, who cares? But even that sense
Joe Blow wouldn't have
apply.
said that
No,
because he would have probably got killed back then.
Yeah, I mean, come on. Because they believed this. They actually believed, and if it wasn't believing in, for one, atheistic ideas would not have existed at that time period. Even if they didn't believe in Christianity, they would have been saying, all right, well, I worship my old gods. But they would have believed in a god of some kind. This whole cynical atheistic view of life did not exist. It just doesn't. And it makes no sense that these characters, and particularly Templars, are saying that.
They would have never had this cynical view of it. They would have, all the military orders, but even just the regular Christian would have been much more devout. Even when the Queen Sibylla kills her son, is that right, Sibylla?
Yeah, that didn't happen either. No, she killed him, but he died. He died when he was young. But
because
he became king after his father, who was a leper, who was Bowen's son, and he died of leprosy. But
that's not like a genetic disease.
No, it's not. And so his son supposedly to have had leprosy, and she killed him. That didn't happen. Now he did die young, and then her husband Guy Guillaume, whatever his name was, did take over and become king. And he was not a great person. He was not a great king. But she chose to marry him. There was the whole love story between her and Balin. There was a rumor that apparently she had an affair with his older brother before she even married Guy. So they're kind of playing off of this rumor that she had an affair with his older brother, and they just kind of substituted him for his older brother to some degree. For one, he wasn't here's another completely ridiculous aspect. No bastard would ever have been able to have been a knight. Right. Certainly not a lord. No bastard can take over a kingdom. So his lands, when he died, if he didn't have an actual heir, would have gone back to the king. It wouldn't have gone to his bastard. That would never have been acceptable. They do kind of play on this a little bit, but none of them would have accepted that. None of them. And his father would never have come and done that anyway. He never would have given him his lands and titles, and you know what I'm saying? That in itself is completely historically inaccurate. It never would have happened.
Yeah, there's throughout the whole movie, it just I always find myself asking, did he ever ask, is this even accurate? Is this even close to being accurate?
I don't think he cared.
No, I guess you're right. He didn't care because it's not that hard for a movie director to actually get some info. Even the guys you and I listen to on Real Crusades history, that guy, I want to read his book. He actually also mentioned a book that I actually read. It was A Concise History of the Crusades by Thomas F. Madden.
Yeah.
And that was actually really good. It was a very fair and good treatment of the
And I don't mind if you have a fair treatment. I'm not saying you shouldn't condemn Christians when they do bad things, or that you shouldn't say the good things that Islamic people have done. You know.
Yeah, your thesis could be the Crusades are terrible and I hate Christians, but at least try to be somewhat historically accurate in proving your point. But
again, this is about Hollywood. This is about Hollywood pushing a certain agenda. They've been doing it for years, but they've gotten more bold over the last probably 10 years.
Here's what they do, though, Jay. When you think of why do we study history, is there any value in the study of history? And you look at something like Cicero, who said, someone like Cicero who said, "He who ignores history is to remain forever a child." And then the reformer Philip Melanchthon said something very similar to that. He said, "Human life without the knowledge of history is to be perpetually a child," or something like that.
It's true.
And then when you look at with Winston Churchill, he said, "As far back as you look," this isn't his exact quote, but it's something like, "As far back as you look, that's how far ahead you'll project." Sure. So it's almost like a slingshot. So the whole thing is to get a true sense of history, to get a true sense of where we're going. And that's what the Hollywood does is they give us no context whatsoever, and they give us no truth. Because there's no context, what we end up with in this movie, for example, which was a great visually, I thought it was fantastic, but it's a very shallow and untruthful version of the Crusades, where the storyline has been tailored to the modern day ignorant misconceptions of the Crusades rather than entertainment which could be based on actual history.
And I'm right. I'm not saying if you want to make a movie about knights, that's fine. Tell a version of the Arthurian legend or something along those lines, or tell a fantasy story. But to take history and take all of the worst narrative tropes that have kind of, made their way into the social consciousness and just perpetuate them on screen is just unacceptable. But again, it's about promoting a specific agenda and promoting a specific narrative, this postmodernistic view. Christianity is bad. And particularly Christianity, but pretty much all religion is bad, and you shouldn't really believe any of it. That religion has its place as a social construct, but in reality, none of it's really true. And if you really believe it and allow it to dictate your actions, you're a zealot, and which is why we can't understand Islam. We can't understand true people who truly believe Islam and believe that what they're doing is right. Well, they're believers, but we can't. No, they're fanatics as far as we're concerned. They're extremists. No, they actually believe what the Quran says or what they understand the Quran to be. Obviously, I don't know enough about the Quran, but we can't understand them in this postmodernistic view, which is what they're kind of throwing onto them. Another reason why he can't just tell the story the way it would actually be was we can't relate to it. Because we can't understand that postmodernistic view. It doesn't apply in our narrative. Our narrative is, well, what are they doing? They're zealots. So you're telling me that everybody were just zealots and extremists. No, they were believers. They believed what they were doing was right. And it dictated their life to them. That's why it doesn't make sense that these characters would have postmodernistic views.
It's an attempt. Yeah, exactly. You're right. It's an attempt to... you think about the protagonist, and he's basically our lens, almost like a lens into this time period. Yeah. And so Ridley Scott is using him as sort of the lens through which we see things. So he has to change basically everything historical about Balian to the point where he's not even a noble anymore. He's actually a blacksmith. To be a noble,
we can't have nobles, because again, that this postmodernistic view is that nobility is evil. And it's the common people. They rise up in their own strength, which is one of the things that his father says to him. In the new kingdom, you're not measured by your nobility, but by what you do. And you can, people who were kings there are in the gutter now, and people who were in the gutter here can become kings there. This view of this, every man can rise up through their own deeds to become something. So you can't have a narrative that talks about nobility, because that doesn't apply to modern postmodernism. Nobility is just another social construct that's evil. So go ahead with what you're going to say. Sorry.
Yeah. So they use the protagonist to put their viewpoints in there. So the protagonist can become this pluralistic. He can, just like Benjamin Martin in The Patriot, which is a movie that I actually enjoy. I like the movie.
I enjoy that movie too, but again, very historically
I think it's great. But what he does is he takes our views today, and he thrusts them back in history, and he makes a character who would have never existed. Francis Marion owned slaves. As a matter of fact, when the slaves got out off his plantation, he chased them down. He hunted them down. And so our hero used his skills at going after slaves in real life that he used to kill the British as well. Well, the thing is, we can't make Benjamin Martin a slave owner because we hate slavery and we despise it. And what you do is what you cause, though, is instead of an understanding and a critical view of history, instead of having an actual critical thinking and understanding in history, what we have are people who now hate our past, so that they'll want to destroy the statues of the heroes of our nation.
They're destroying our identity by doing so, and they're doing that on purpose because they have to demonize our identity in order to destroy it. And if they can destroy our identity, then they can refashion it into what they want it to be. Again, it's very much a control thing. It's a way for people to politically control people. That's one of the reasons why they're destroying our history through films. They have to destroy the church's credibility so that they can then change the narrative and be like, well, the church has always been bad. Look, you can go back to the Crusades, and the church has always been terrible, so therefore you shouldn't listen to the church, you should listen to us, and that justifies when they want to attack us. Oh, we're going to attack the church now. Well, because of the Crusades. Or we're going to attack capitalism. Oh, because of Indians. We got to attack America because the Indians. Or the slaves. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
Because it changes our narrative, and then they can then justify taking control and changing the country into what they want it to be. And
well, when you think of, again, we can acknowledge bad things, but when you say the Crusades, like even one of our presidents who, I'll just say Barack Obama came up and he was like,
yeah.
Oh yeah, I mean, don't forget Christians and the Crusades, as if that's just one word that's going to shut us all up. And it's like this.
Exactly.
If America and Europe are so bad, then why do people keep wanting to get in?
It's true.
What has Western Christian culture provided? And you look at the scientific method, the free market, equality of rights for women that the world has never known, unprecedented human rights, not to mention all the scientific discoveries and everything that makes our life what it is now in the modern world. But by any historic standard, we should be very proud of our heritage, warts and all.
Absolutely.
We can take the good and the bad, and we can actually look at it and say, look at all the good stuff. Yeah. We can be proud. We don't have to hang our heads.
Well, that's another narrative that you're seeing in Hollywood. I'd heard it's an Irish guy I follow, and his name's not coming to me, but he does a lot of social commentary, and he made the comment that, in particularly in Europe as well, America, they're trying to take the white Europeans' contribution out of history and to make all of our contributions to be evil. So they're changing all of the narratives and all of the stories by replacing any good white European with somebody that's ethnic. So, for instance, as much as I know that this is going to make people angry, my niece included, Hamilton, the play Hamilton is a horrible bastardization of
garbage.
History. It's absolute garbage. The idea that Alexander Hamilton was a Spanish person is not true. He was not a Spanish person. Secondly, they have Thomas Jefferson as a black guy. None of that is true. It's not even remotely true. And I know, I laugh too. But people are like, this is a big deal. And I'm like, why? He goes, well, because this is what the creator said. I wanted to tell an America that I could relate to. So I'm going to change the history to fit my narrative. But that doesn't make any sense, dude. Why? Because your people didn't have anything to do with founding America. Let's just be honest. So the white Europeans did. So you have an America because of white Europeans. But we can't have that because that doesn't fit the current narrative. White Europeans are all bad. We're all terrible, and nothing we've ever done in history has been good. But all these ethnic people, they're just peaceful people who are just trying to live, and we're just being oppressed by the white people. So in order to change America's history again, we're going to take and we're going to make all these founding fathers into ethnic people. Again, I'm not racist. I have nothing against ethnic people, but don't try to change history to fit your narrative. Okay.
Well, it reminds me, it reminds me of cultural appropriation. That's and I heard a guy named Duke Pesta. He's Dr. Duke Pesta talks about, he does some sort of Christian education thing online, but I was just listening to him. And he was talking about this idea that whenever like white people, cultural appropriations where white people do yoga, for example, and they're disrespecting Hinduism, and like there was a few years ago where there was this college campus where some students demanded that white girls stop wearing hooped earrings.
Right.
And they're saying that hooped earrings were their heritage going back to their slave days. And of course, that's not true. It goes back to Egypt, which if you think about it, Africa had the first institution of slavery, but
yes, they did.
On a large scale, but not American slavery. But
according to modern, not historians, this is what I'm looking for. That the study of human evolution, What are they called?
Well, the point he was going towards.
Let me finish my point real quick. Then you can finish yours. What is that called, though? Anthropology. According to anthropology, mankind started in Africa. So go ahead.
I had an anthropology professor, and I want to get to the point. I
know you did. Let's get to
cut me off of.
Sorry.
But I had an anthropology professor who screamed at a kid who asked him if he went fishing when he went down to the Keys, and he said, "No, I don't go and rip animals out of their natural environment and watch them gulp and gasp for breath. I don't." He just went off on this ridiculous. It was insane. But anyway, yeah, that's where liberalism leads. So he's talking about cultural appropriation. He's talking about the hooped earrings thing, and that's coming up more and more and more. And he's like, what if white people go into a Jamaican restaurant or an Indian restaurant, or it could be any cultural ethnic restaurant, and they say, stop using electricity, stop using those light bulbs. That's cultural appropriation.
Right.
It would be absolutely ridiculous.
It is ridiculous.
Whenever Westerners show appreciation for other cultures, whether it's food or fashions, they're labeled racists now, and it's just absurd.
Well, for one, Islam's considered a race. Like, when did Islam become a race? Islam's not a race; it's a religion. So if I'm a racist because I disagree with Islam, then you're a racist if you disagree with Christianity. Like, that doesn't make any sense.
It's retarded.
It's absolutely retarded.
So, but imagine, I just can't imagine acting that way. I can't imagine going into an Italian restaurant or an Italian going into an Italian restaurant and saying,
into a pizza place
demanding,
saying,
stop eating lasagna.
You can't make pizza because that's my cultural appropriation. Domino's, you need to be shut down.
I mean, but you know what? I guarantee you these people don't know history, and it's to remain forever a child. That's why they act like that. But you think about it, why is it that we have such a historically illiterate society? Yeah. And you got shows like Jerry Springer. And I mean, to watch something like that, you would have to be a child.
Yeah, absolutely.
Your mind would have to be very, So that explains that.
Yeah, absolutely. I love the one historian there said, anything that is considered an insult to Islam was met with extreme punishment and still is today. So you can't question Islamic dogma. So this idea that they would be willing to live in a multi-religious environment is just simply not true. As a matter of fact, the multi-religious environment that was created after the Second Crusade, that was pretty much destroyed in this time period, is what they're covering is the end of the Second Crusade, pretty much. I want to say it was Second Crusade, into the Third Crusades, where they had created this peace around Islam, thanks to the Templar, or around Jerusalem, thanks to the Knights Templar, where everybody was kind of allowed to come and go in Jerusalem and visit their holy sites. And there was a peace for I want to say 7 years or something like that before it kind of fell apart. But it didn't fall apart because of Christians. It fell apart because of Islam. And that's really the reality here, was that even existed because of Christianity for the period of time it did exist. So this idea that it was just postmodern. See, here's again, it's the good world that's being created, all being created by atheist and postmodernistic Christian cynics or Islamic people. Basic Christianity provides no good to the world, and that's what this whole thing says over and over again. That's beat into your consciousness through this movie, and it makes no sense historically because nobody would have believed that at that time period. Balin was not a cynic. He would not have said, "I've lost my religion and God doesn't talk to me." You know what I'm saying? I don't care about religion. And when he turns to the priest and he says, "You've taught me everything I need to know about religion, priest."
Oh, yeah.
He says, "Convert to Islam, repent later." Well, for one, he's trying to save people, and he's trying to tell them that, hey, listen, God would understand if you don't want to die today. It's like, why is that a bad thing? And it's portrayed as this horrible thing.
Is the priest is constantly the patriarch or the cleric of Jerusalem, or whatever he's called, is constantly portrayed as this absolute buffoon.
Oh, absolutely.
Even the scene right before the one you just mentioned is where Balian is talking about burning the bodies.
Yes,
And
right.
and the priest at the time, and Balian would 100% agreed with him that no, we don't burn the bodies because that's inappropriate. They were very, very.
They would
But
not have burned the bodies.
but
That
then
is
Balian's
ludicrous.
argument is considered scientific and this
Yeah.
and that. But here's the thing: Christians throughout the ages, whenever the bubonic plague came,
Yeah.
they would bury them in mass graves. They put down lime. They'd cover the bodies with dirt, and then they'd put more bodies, and then they cover it with dirt so that these diseases didn't spread. But they were very particular about how they buried because they believed in the resurrection. They lived their lives in a harsher day than ours.
They did.
Where life expectancy life was much more fragile.
Right.
They were expecting and living for the day of the resurrection.
Well, that's even like the idea that his wife would have killed herself because she lost a child. Everybody lost children in that time period, and she would, if she was really a Christian, she would not have killed herself because she would have believed she was going to hell. So that idea that she would have just out of grief killed herself is just, even that doesn't make complete sense. Now, again, like the one historian did say that I was listening to, she said, I would, losing a child can cause grief. So I would not make a comment on the fact that somebody maybe could have killed themselves in that time period after losing a child. But honestly, that doesn't make sense. Suicide in that context was not something that happened often in that time period. People didn't just go around killing themselves.
I mean, they still had hope. And you think about most women, because of childbirth, because women and infants died quite often. I think I don't want to say what the wrong thing, but I think life expectancy was under 40 at that time.
Oh, absolutely.
For women.
Yeah.
But the thing is, you think about it, it's like, what sense would it make to think I'm going to be dead anyway in a few years?
Yeah.
Might as well kill myself now. But they lived with, they were true believers. They had true faith. And just because Ridley Scott or these other postmodern atheistic people who are just smarter than everybody else in history, just because they think Christianity is bunk and stupid, doesn't mean that these Christians in their time believed that.
Exactly.
And I just think that Ridley Scott makes no effort whatsoever to get into the mindset of the medieval age.
No, of course not.
And it's a great injustice to history. And I just
even he made Robin Hood, his version of Robin Hood, same thing.
Yeah.
Other than Friar Tuck, but then all the Christians were bad, and again, Friar Tuck was considered, a buffoon or a I'm going to do what I want to do, and I'm not really a proper Christian kind of mentality. And it's this whole idea that, again, forcing this postmodernistic view of life onto on history to promote a specific agenda, and it just doesn't work. It's just not true. So if you're going to tell them it's like watching Band of Brothers from trying to tell World War II through the eyes of the 60s. You can't. You can't have the events of World War II and the people in World War II acting like the people from the 60s. If they had tried to do that in Band of Brothers, nobody would watch that movie or that television show. Everybody would have been like, doesn't make any sense. Same with Saving Private Ryan. If we had watched Saving Private Ryan and it had been all about how war is terrible and America is terrible and we shouldn't be fighting anywhere ever and peace and love, it wouldn't have made sense because that's not the way they thought in World War II.
Here was the understanding, especially in the medieval mindset, and Christians still believe in just warfare now. They still believe in Romans 13 and the state, if a cop comes up on somebody who's killing children, needs to kill that man, needs to to defend, to wield the sword in defense. But when you look at when you just look at the early mindset, like I love the mindset of the early Germanic Christians.
Yeah.
When the Christianization of the Saxons is going on, and they're these warrior barbaric people.
Yeah.
And these early Germanic Christians, spirituality was very interesting. When they became converted to Christianity, they didn't really have a deep theological or philosophical ideas of sin and salvation necessarily, but they identified with Christ as their valiant warrior, as the one who would, when they heard "Blessed are the merciful," this was seen to them as a warrior chieftain demonstrating care for his men, and that resonated with them in that time because they believed that in order for our priest, in order for our wives and our kids to be safe, in order for them to have a priest who can be nonviolent, we have to be Christian soldiers on the front lines.
That's right.
And that was their whole mindset.
Yeah.
And today we have a bunch of people who are so soft that even thinking of Jesus as a warrior is terrifying to them. But the Bible clearly says the resurrected Lord he's a warrior, and he's coming to judge and make war.
Again, this is this postmodern idea that war is never just. There's never a just war. There's never killing somebody is never okay. Well, that's not true, because you can kill children as long as they're unborn.
Oh yeah,
or unwanted.
Definitely. Well, when you think about what our enlightenment has brought on, which really wasn't enlightenment at all. It was more of a great age of darkening.
I agree.
And it resulted in more and more deaths than the world has ever known.
Absolutely.
But anyway, going back to Christ being the warrior, when you look at, I should have wrote these scriptures down, but it's where he says that I see the Son of Man coming on the clouds. He's talking a war language there. Yeah. He's talking about war coming, and not one stone will be left unturned. Yeah. And so what he's saying is that although it was Tiberius who came in, Jesus is saying, I'm coming to judge Jerusalem.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it was him that came to judge Jerusalem. Yeah. And to crush them for their rebellion and for their sin.
Well, even Jesus said, when he said, I didn't come to bring peace, but I came to bring a sword. We look at this idea that there's never conflict, and it's the whole idea that tolerance is love. That true love is to be tolerant. Well, that's not true at all. True love is not to be tolerant, because I don't tolerate misbehaving of my children. Yet I truly love my children. But I don't tolerate when they misbehave. Why? Because I got to teach them that what they're doing is inappropriate. It's wrong. They need to learn that that's not okay. I'm not going to tolerate that. So, again, this postmodern idea of tolerance didn't exist in that time period. It didn't exist in Islam. It didn't exist in the Christians. And if it did exist in any of them, it would have been the Christians. It didn't exist with the Jews. None of them believed in tolerating other religions.
Right. That whole pluralistic mindset. Yeah. We mentioned that before. That pluralistic mindset would have never been in some medieval times, some medieval mind. And actually, that whole idea of giving religious freedom and providing it and protecting it for other people.
Oh, that's a decidedly American thing.
Absolutely, a Christian thing.
And it came from Christianity. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, when you really look at a lot of what the reformers did, the Christian reformers, Calvin and Luther, but more so Calvin, because his ideas spread throughout the West very quickly. He was somebody who was extraordinarily evangelistic and equipped many people and many men to go out and encouraged even the French Huguenots and the French who were fleeing to Geneva for protection after being discipled. They came back to France to be martyred, but a lot of his ideas came to America, so that in the British Parliament they called the American Revolution the Presbyterian problem, right? Because it was descendants of Calvin who actually had ideologically had the greatest problem with the British.
But that idea is a postmodern thing. It didn't apply then. And we're trying to force that idea or that moralistic view that we've come to believe as true moralistic view is tolerance onto these people. That these people would have believed that, and they wouldn't have. It doesn't make sense. So you forced your moralistic view of tolerance on people that would not have believed that. Oh, we can't have that. Then they're all evil. Then nobody's a hero. Well, that's not true.
Balian's speech was absurd.
It was very
absurd. When Christians in that time and Muslims would have thought the same of Christians, they would have not thought that they had any right, or they would not have respected their holy sites, because they thought it was completely. It would be like us. It would be like us. I don't know, some Mormon thing, some Mormon temple saying, "Oh well, we need to count that as equal to our religion because And it's like, no, that's a false religion. It's demonic. It's that's
this
a true
idea,
believer's
right?
mindset.
Exactly. There is no such. But again, as a Christian, we're able to say, "We love you anyway," but we're not going to tolerate it and say it's okay. But we love you anyway, and we don't want to force anything on you, because forced conversion isn't really conversion. And Christianity is about having a true heart change and building a relationship with God.
True.
That is not what Islam is about. Islam was convert or die. It's not, even though they would say, oh, really, it's about your heart. It's not. And so this convert or die thing, Christians didn't do that. And that's another narrative that's tried to be forced on Christianity during the Crusades.
Absolutely.
They didn't do that. So this whole idea was non-existent. You either believed it and accepted it, or you didn't. And if you didn't, they left you alone to some degree. Obviously, I'm not saying there were never any misrepresentations or misuses of power or oppressive Christians that ever lived. That'd be a lie. But I digress. So anyway, you had said you had a list of stuff that was completely inaccurate. Go ahead and go through that.
Oh. Let's see if I could find it.
Okay. Because I wanted to write down all the things, but there were so many of them, I just stopped writing anything down.
Yeah, I didn't get real far, but we probably talked about a lot of the things I already had. Yeah. But I mean, yeah, we already talked about some of these things, how dark, how gray, that shows the villages being very impoverished, very low standard of living.
Misrepresentation of priests.
It was mainly, a lot of the things was the mindset. But I mean, there were certain things like the battle where I don't understand. I see why the cinematography would have been great for the clashing of the horses, right? Yeah. But it's weird to me. It's always weird to me when any movie, it shows them giving up the high ground, because that happens often. It would not have happened unless, and this did happen, this was a military tactic, even in the Battle of Hastings, it was used against Harold, but where they feign retreat. And then when they feign retreat, and then they crash down on them.
The Battle of Bannockburn as well. It was used in...
But to be outnumbered and you got a fortress castle behind you, and then you sit there and you willingly charge.
Lord. Yeah.
And all they're really going to do is just let you go by.
And where were the people? The people are going to die if we retreat. Bullcrap. The people would have been in Carrick already. So why the heck was he not in Carrick? That made absolutely no sense. And particularly since they knew how close Balin was. It's like he was almost there. Like, oh my gosh. But again, that I can understand. That's one of those historically inaccurate, tactically inaccurate things that they do in movies to try and build tension.
Charging straight at a larger force,
and to give him
head on
a historic, a heroic view, because he hadn't really done anything heroic up to that point. So now he's known as this hero, and here's another historically inaccurate thing. The king did not know him, and he would not have just been like, oh, I know you. Like, remember, he's like, oh, you don't know me. I know you, or they don't know me, God doesn't know me. Oh, I know you. No, you don't. You met him twice. You don't know him. It's ridiculous.
Now, here's one of the things, like we could go on and on. I got some more stuff about the historical inaccuracies, but one thing I actually wrote that it's funny because it didn't happen, but Saladin, or it's not recorded in anything to happen, where he sent his physician to see Baldwin.
No, yeah, he wouldn't.
But what I didn't mind so much about that is there is a record where he sends a physician to see Richard the Lionheart.
Okay, and that's true.
And here's the thing.
But why would he send a physician to a leper? Right. He was a leper. They would not have been able to touch him. He would have been considered unclean even in Islam.
While they would not have done that, here's what I would say about that. One, I would like it to be more pure. Like, okay, did that ever happen? No, there's no record of it. But I understand in movies that you got 2 hours, right? Yeah. So you want to give a real presentation of it. So, for example, in John Adams, I think Washington says something to Abigail Adams that he did. It's not recorded that he said that, but he said it in a letter to somebody else.
Right. So it could.
And
Yes. Exactly.
and it's something to do with, I think, slavery or something. And he said it to her. And
Right.
so it's not like they're trying to twist his character or misrepresent him. They just have a very brief amount of time.
Right.
So I didn't have a problem with that.
But they did misrepresent Saladin, because Saladin was actually known as very tyrannical and violent.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
He was not known as some wise, great wise teacher, tolerant, and he was not. That was not him. He was murderous and horrible. One thing they did say is that he is at times referred to as magnanimous, but really he was tyrannical. He was very violent.
Well, if you think about Richard Lionheart,
they attacked Sunnis. They attacked other Islamic people all the time. He killed like another Islamic lord when he was building his kingdom. He killed a couple other Islamic lords and took their lands. I mean, he was not this like great little
No, and honestly, the reason he probably sent a physician to see Lionheart was because Lionheart was kicking his butt.
Yeah, probably.
Even though Richard Lionheart didn't take Jerusalem, it's actually considered a victory, because even though he didn't get the goal, he actually whooped Saladin all the way up the coast.
He did.
And but here's the thing that another thing about Muslims, you were just talking about Saladin's his viciousness, but Vlad the Impaler, Vlad II of Wallachia, is remembered for his cruelty, right?
Yeah.
But what we forget is actually how cruel the Ottoman Muslim invaders were.
Absolutely.
He chased them out of his borders.
Yep.
And he's called Vlad the Impaler because he was doing what the Muslims were doing. They were impaling Muslims. They were impaling, I guess at the time, Wallachia was Christian. They would conquer the Christians. They would impale the men, women, and children on spears and watch them slowly die in agonizing death. And so Vlad just simply defeated the Muslims, and he gave them a taste of their own medicine, and he's forever known for his cruelty. And it's kind of like, what about these people who were coming in, these barbarians who were cruelly coming in and attacking your land?
That's another historical narrative that has been perpetuated that isn't necessarily true.
And it's just an incessant attack, like we've said, about from academia,
anybody who's
Hollywood,
a Christian. Oh, because he was a Christian.
Media.
Look, he was just as bad. It's the same kind of thing. It's just a way of saying, look, Christians are just as bad as everybody else. And the reality of it is, we're not. So that's simply that truth. Christianity in itself brings out the best in people, not the worst. But they have to lower it to every other religious view. Oh, well, they're just as bad as everybody else. And it just isn't. And because they have to change the narrative. They have to. It's all this is about. That's all this narrative change is about that. It's to perpetuate a certain idea. So, overall, what did you think of the movie? Since this is a movie.
Overall, I mean, I agree with the historians we listen to. I agree with the fact that they. I like when people become interested in history, but I can't stand when it's so twisted and distorted in a way that it's just so misguided. So that
the lay person is going to think this is accurate,
right? And that's what I don't like is this idea of, well, Hollywood. What I hate about it is this idea that Hollywood has to change history to make it interesting, and it's like that's absolutely not true at all.
No, it's not. I mean, but even the Patriot, which I love, is completely historically inaccurate at times.
Yeah, and here's the thing: even before, just watching that movie, it comes across that the Brits and Tarvington or Tarleton.
I don't think his real name was Tarleton.
Bannister Tarleton, and I think it's Tarvington in the movie or something.
Yeah, Tarleton.
But I mean,
the one he didn't die because he was one of Wilberforce's biggest proponents in because he was the guy that was really against Wilberforce trying to get slavery destroyed in Britain.
Right. Yeah.
He was actually a proponent of slavery. Yeah. So he, that person as a whole was not a great person to begin with, but he didn't die in the battle. Go ahead. I think you were going to say.
He didn't die, and he also didn't burn down the church.
Oh, God, no.
I mean, they really go overboard with him shooting the kid in the back and different things like that.
He's a villain.
Yeah, bad things happen, but and you end up hating the guy, and that's the whole point. You want to
Right,
create
but
this
it
hatred.
demonizes all.
But
You don't really get a good view of British people. It just makes it
right,
seem like all British people were just horrible, and they
yeah, yeah.
weren't. They didn't
You
do
you
stuff like that. That never would have been done. The British never would have burned women and children in a church like that during the Revolution, because honestly, they considered us British subjects.
you're stirring up hate is what
I
you're
know.
doing. And what you could do, I mean, people are.
Oh, you
Here's
should
the
hear.
thing:
There's a
people
British guy that
people
did
are
a review on
sinful
that. It's just,
anyway. Yeah, people are sinful anyway. But if you just put somebody's picture, their face on a screen, half of the people are going to hate them anyway.
it's true.
But
It's true.
they kind of stir the pot, though. They kind of
It's just
stir it up.
they're trying to. Again, it's Hollywood, so everything it becomes a dramatized version, an overly extreme caricature in some way of something true. And I understand that. There is some reality to that in history. But have you watched something like Saving Private Ryan or Band of Brothers, you can see that you can tell a historically accurate film while keeping, character development. Why? While making it human without making it so extreme. You know what I'm saying? The villains, the
Right.
Nazis were never portrayed in Band of Brothers as just horribly extreme, and they were probably far more extreme than the British were during the Revolution.
Yeah, definitely.
And yet, they do a decent job of showing.
Well,
Yes, there were
they
atrocities,
had to
but
be. The Nazis were a cult.
Yes, they were a
They were
cult.
essentially a cult. So
They were
they
absolutely.
so their extremeness. You can kind of relate with a British guy
Yeah.
who's basically doing his duty, and
Yeah.
and
I mean,
you don't
we
have
were-
to you don't have to like the guy, but
We
you
were
can.
subjects who were rebelling against the crown.
Right. Yeah.
But they were still considered as brothers. You know what I'm saying? This whole view
Right.
that we were just these backwater people that nobody respected, that wasn't necessarily true. The British people see, that's another narrative that Americans like to tell about Britons. But you realize the reason why a lot of the taxes that the British were putting on us were not unreasonable. They had just gotten done and were still in the middle of a war with France. They were bankrupt. They needed money, and they just wanted us to do our part to support their, the empire's war efforts, and we didn't want to. We're like, no, you know what I'm saying? That's unreasonable because we felt like we didn't have representation in Parliament, which we didn't, and that's true. We did not really have representation in Parliament, but these taxes that the British were levying against Americans were not as horrible as our narrative in America tries to make it out to be.
There was
They
there
really
was some
were not.
fake news going on there.
Of course there was. There was some fake news. Absolutely. Absolutely. Because they're not saying that they didn't manipulate things. Of course they did. Were they wrong? No, I don't think they were wrong. It's like Benjamin Martin said in The Patriot. He's like, do I believe that, the American we can govern ourselves? Sure. Do I believe that we're being taxed without representation? Absolutely. But I don't believe that we should be fighting with these people over it. And I think that there's some truth to that. Like, really, I'm glad we did, but in the same extent, there are some narratives about the revolution that are not quite historically accurate.
Yeah.
But
Definitely.
anyway, I digress. I enjoyed this movie. I enjoyed it a lot, particularly the first time I saw it. You really don't get a whole lot of movies about the Crusades, so it was this being one of my favorite time periods of history.
Oh yeah.
I enjoyed being able to see it. My problem is that I love Templars. I love the Knights of St. John, the Knights of Rhodes and Malta, and I would have rather have seen them tell that story than tell this story.
Yeah.
And if you were going to tell this story, I would rather you have told it accurately and not have made it so unbalanced to one side, which happened to be really the side that was the original aggressor. But again, it has to do with the Hollywood narrative. But I did enjoy it. I'd give it a good solid 2.5 stars, probably out of 4.
Out of 5 stars, I might give it 1.5.
Really? See,
But-
I would give it a little.
No,
more than that.
Yeah, I'd give it at least 2.
I mean, as a movie, it wasn't terrible. Balian is a Mary Sue, whatever you want to call it. He is absolutely good at everything right from the get-go. He trains with his father for a minute, and then all of a sudden he can fight everybody in the world and beat beat 2 Saracen warlords technically. You know what I'm saying?
Liam Nelson's good though, man.
Well, yeah, but still, you know what I'm saying? It's like I mean, even his father gets mortally wounded during that fight. And
Well, so here's the thing that you got to think. Like I said, I mentioned Washington and him saying something in John Adams' HBO series.
Yeah, which we both love.
So here's the thing. If that was you, let's just say I said something about you that you had said,
right?
But I messed up the person that you said it to.
Sure.
You probably wouldn't be too mad about that. You'd
No.
probably just correct it. No, it was
that
not.
Doesn't change the fact
It was
Mary
Bill.
Sue.
It wasn't. But here's the thing. But if I totally lied about you and misrepresented you as some doofus like the Templars are, and then you would be very upset, and rightfully so. And anybody who's watching these movies would be upset about it if they were some stupid Templar saying, God, it's God's will. It's God's will. It's God.
Oh my God, that was awful.
No, the Muslims do that. The Muslims are the ones that say Allah Akbar over and over again as they cut people's heads off.
The Christians were yelling, "It's God's will. Let's kill everybody." No, you're right. Absolutely. That was another ridiculously historically inaccurate aspect.
When you take, but that's the thing. When you take a picture, even though it is art, even if you say, "Well, we're just trying to tell a good story," well, you're telling a true story with true people with their names, and people are going to take this seriously.
Hey, I mean, listen. Jeff Shira is a master of this, being able to tell historical, it's historical fiction, but it has truth. It's true. It rings true. The whole story rings true, and it makes sense because it rings true. But
Rise to Rebellion.
Rise Rebellion, great. There are plenty of other historical fiction out there that Cromwell, even though, he's definitely anti-Christian, but still there is a lot of historical fiction out there that gets it right for the time period. And makes it believable, and we can look at it and go, yeah, this is believable, and doesn't force political ideology and our postmodernistic views onto them. So, they can do this, and you can make a movie, but this is an art piece that was designed to tell a specific ideology that he wanted to tell. And let's be honest, if it was made today, of course, this was made a couple, 2006 or something like that. So if it was made today,
05,
all of the 05. So if this was made today, then all of the reviews from these political pandering film critics would be, well, it doesn't make it's not it's misogynist and this and that, blah 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 blah. If they had made it, and it's homophobic and blah blah. If they had made it accurate, you know what I'm saying? And it's, why can't we tell a story that, makes more sense in today's world? Well, you know what? It doesn't, because we're telling a historical movie. So if you want to tell a movie about knights and stuff, then tell a movie about knights and stuff set in a fantasy world with your view. You know what I'm saying? But don't take historical accuracy and turn it into something you want it to be.
There was a picture, Jay, that was taken during 9/11 where these men I can't remember. I think it's a flag. But these construction workers, they're picking up a wall or they're picking up something. But anyway, so it's these three white guys, which, it's three white guys. They're working, they're picking something up, and there's a picture that's taken. That's just a really beautiful picture.
Yeah.
Well, they made a statue of this picture. Yeah. And in the statue, they make it a black, a Hispanic, and I don't know if it was a woman but they just kind of changed it up a bit.
Right, to make it politically acceptable.
And the argument on both sides was, well, this is art. It's representing the nation. It's representing who America is, and it's not just three white men. And here's the thing. It's like,
but it was
my question is, why don't you make your own picture?
Exactly.
Why do you have to take
I'm
fine with you. I'm fine with you making up your own picture. If you want to make art, then make art.
That is the point, and I'm going to say something that is completely politically inaccurate, or not inaccurate, but politically uncouth, is the fact that they don't have anything to tell, so they have to steal ours, because particularly when it comes to history. I'm not talking about 9/11, but when it comes to history, they can't tell their story because they weren't part of this, and that's the problem. So you have to change it to fit their narrative to make them feel like they're a part of it, but they didn't, and that lessens the impact that white people had. For instance, if you're changing white characters to black, like Thomas Jefferson. So what you're really saying is that white people didn't write the Declaration of Independence; a black person did. That's what you're saying. So you're stealing, culturally stealing, not appropriating, but culturally stealing the not successes, but the achievements that European white people had, and taking them and saying it's yours because you don't have any part to play in that. You didn't have any part to play in that. Well, there's nothing wrong with not having any part to play in that. You know what I'm saying? Nobody's saying you're lesser because you had no part to play in that. But don't minimize my part that I played in that. You know what I'm saying?
Right,
That's like me.
Exactly.
I hit a home run and I won the World Series for the New York Mets, and in the movie I'm a black guy. You know what I'm saying? Well, why am I a black guy? You know what I'm saying? Oh, well, because we want everybody to feel like they had a part in the winning that World Series. No, I won that World Series with the home run.
Right, yeah.
You know what I'm saying? And so that's the problem. Because they don't have any part to play in, because whatever race or whatever doesn't have any part to play in this, they can't just enjoy it and say, great, look what happened here or whatever. No, they have to steal it and make it theirs too. That's this new postmodern idea. That's what that's what you're doing. You're changing history. You know what I'm saying? And so I have to be a part of that. And it's the same thing with superheroes. They're like, well, superheroes are all white, mostly white men. Okay. I understand that, so we'll create a black superhero. No, what we want to do is we want to change Superman into a black guy. You know what I'm saying? Why do we have to change Superman into a black guy? Oh, because we want the history of Superman to be our history now. You see what I'm saying?
Right.
No, it doesn't work that way. Create your own. But that's not acceptable anymore. Now, I'm not saying everybody feels that way, because that's simply not true. Kevin Smith, one of the guy, a creator I really love, somebody had really attacked his movie online and really attacked his daughter who acted in it. And he said, "Listen, dude, don't attack me and don't attack my daughter. Go out and if you don't like what we make, go out and make something you like. That's the best way that you can handle that." And I agree with you. I think that's what we need to do. If you don't, or make a movie about African heroes or African American heroes or Spanish heroes or whatever, you know what I'm saying? But we're talking about the Crusades, which is European history. You know
it's essentially like taking, if you took a movie about Jackie Robinson and made him a white guy,
it would be
that would tick me off.
It would tick me off too.
It just wouldn't make sense because of what he did, what he accomplished, what he went through. He's a true hero.
He is a true hero. So I would not want that taken and given to me or to given to some white guy. You know what I'm saying? No, that's not right. And it's the same kind of thing when you're taking white or European. I wouldn't just say white, but European, because not all when you turn, for instance, Achilles into a black guy, well, it's Greek. Okay, well, their Greeks are considered whites. Okay, but they're Greek. You know what I'm saying? That's like saying, right. But we have this. We've classified everybody into racial groups, when the reality of it is there's one race, and that's human. There isn't multiple races. Now, if you want to talk about cultural groups, that's completely different. But then you have to separate Greeks and Italians and Spanish from Hispanics and white Europeans, British people from Scandinavian people. You know what I'm saying? Or from German people. It's all different. You can't just bulk everything into, well, your skin is white, and so therefore everything that any white person has ever done falls on you. Well, no. Culturally, I'm an American. You know what I'm saying? So culturally, that's where I fall. Am I a white American? Sure. But I'm an American. That's no different than being a black American, in my opinion. You know what I'm saying? An African American is an American culturally. But we are all humans. I don't get this whole, skin color. To me, it's not about skin color. It's about culture. If you want to talk about culture, your culture, plays a part in something.
It's offensive to me that for somebody else that I would have to teach my kids not to be proud of our history and our culture simply because they're white. It's offensive to me personally, but it's also something that I look at them and I think, man, that's sad. That's sad that you're that fragile.
Right.
And
or as a Christian.
I'm not going to treat other people as if they're that fragile, even though the left wants us to. Exactly. They want them to be victimized. They want them to be a certain way. And I refuse to treat them like that, as if they're too fragile, because they're not.
Absolutely. Well, that's what they're doing with Christianity here. They're trying to make Christians feel guilty for their history, because of this that didn't actually happen. So they have to manipulate it to try and make us feel guilty, to put us down, to put us in our place, if you would. It's the same kind of thing. Culturally, an African American, I don't feel guilty that there were slaves, African American slaves, 200 years ago. I don't feel guilty that that people that settled this country drove the Indians off it. The same way I don't feel guilty that the British drove the Aboriginals off their land to some degree, or that this African country conquered this African country, or the Vikings conquered the British, or whatever. You know what I'm saying? Right. I don't feel guilty because I didn't do that. You know what I'm saying? And so what if my quote unquote ancestors did? Again, that's what we're coming down to here is you're trying to make us feel guilty for something that was done 1,000 years ago. And that was normal for 1,000 years ago. That's the whole point of this. Anyway.
Well, when you think about it, though, history, what we have is there's always a problem. When you look at what Karl Marx came up with, he said the problem is capital. Yeah. There's the conflict in history. And what is the problem is capital. Why did he believe that? He believed because it was the motivating factor for man. But the thing is, man is motivated by more than just money. Some men are only motivated by money, but that's not true for everybody.
It's true.
Some people are motivated by love. Some people are motivated for status or something else.
Yeah.
Name 100 other things.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
The problem is when we look at history, we always want to see it and interpret it and say, oh, well, this is the solution for man. And the only thing that is the real solution is the cross.
Yeah.
It's the same with marriage. When you look at marriage, for example, Christ is represented as Christ and his bride, Christ and his church is what the man and the woman are symbolized as. Or I'm saying the wrong word there, but anyway, you get what I'm saying. But what had to happen was the cross.
Yeah.
For that to actually for us to be united to Christ.
Yeah. Absolutely.
And when you look at marriage, the cross is the same solution for a marriage. The cross is the same solution for like racial things, even though you said absolutely. There is one race. But here's the thing, is we can't help you with reparations or some government programs. We can't help you with that.
Yeah.
Now, I'm not saying that money doesn't help, but when you look at it biblically, what we should do is the church should gather up if there's a poor church. And I'm not talking about white or black. I'm just saying, if there's a wealthy church and there's a poor church, the wealthy church should go out of its way to help that poor church.
Absolutely, I agree.
Not ask for reparations and not ask for a government handout. And that's how we should interact. But the solution with any problem in our society is truly the cross.
Absolutely.
It's Christ.
Absolutely.
And so when you look at history, everybody's trying to interpret it and trying to throw their own spin on it and trying to figure out solutions to problems.
Right. Absolutely.
And you're going to miss when you don't look to the cross.
Oh, I agree. And that's when you misrepresent the cross on purpose for a political narrative and agenda like they do in this movie is why it's sad to me, because you're just hurting people in the long run, because they're not going to want, maybe someone might refuse to come to the cross or even listen to what we have to say because this movie represents Christians as horrible. And I have a problem with that. At least get it right.
Yeah.
If you're going to tell the story, at least get it right. Or if you want to tell a different story, tell a different story. It's just like you said, historically speaking, if you don't like the founding fathers all being white, well then tell a different story. Tell a story about something else. But you don't have to appropriate history to change it to fit your political narrative. It just doesn't work that way. And it's like I just had him pulled up and now he's gone. It was a philosopher that said, people who forget history are doomed to repeat it. And we're seeing that now in America with even in such a short period of time, a lot of modern people have forgotten what the Civil War was fought about, and we're heading down the same path in a lot of ways. And I could look at even the past couple elections, what's going on in Virginia right now, what's going on between the South and the North, and this huge gap between peoples who, I'm not talking about race, but this huge gap between people who believe that they have a voice and for people who don't. Like there's a lot of people that feel like their voice was taken away and that they're continuing to have their voice taken away. And that was one of the things that caused the Civil War to happen. And we're going right down that track again because we don't teach it to our kids. So they've forgotten about it. All they know is this spin, this political spin we've put on it, and they're going to be doomed to repeat it if we don't step in and tell them the truth about it. Like, listen, what you're going down is a road that you will take to war. Oh, no, it won't happen for us because we're different than you. We're better than you. We can make it work where your people didn't. No, that's the whole point of history. So if you change it to fit your political narrative, you're changing the ability to understand it so that you won't make the same mistakes. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
And that's what I see in a lot of these Hollywood movies. The Patriot being another one. Braveheart has another one. Not even close to historically accurate. Great movie, loved it, but it's not historically accurate. Yes, do I love the fact that it gets people interested in history? Absolutely. A good movie will get people interested in history, and I love that. And that I do love about this movie. It gets people interested in the Crusades, but it's still really just about creating a certain political ideology. Again, because we have to wind this down here, I did enjoy the movie. I did. Is it the best movie I've ever seen? No. Is it a movie that holds, I think, upon your first watching, I enjoyed it a lot, but then upon scrutiny, it just doesn't hold up. Even as a movie in itself, the guy's a Mary Sue. I mean, he can just do everything right from the get-go. His only problem, his only real suffering is, okay, my wife died and she had a baby. That's it. But you never experience that really, other than at the beginning, he's suffering and he kills a priest who, because he's hurting. That's it. Then after that, he can do everything. He's a blacksmith that all of a sudden knows how to bring agriculture to a land that he has no familiarity with. Yeah. Although, historically speaking, the Crusaders brought agriculture and made that area better. That was one of the things that they did bring. True. And so I can see, like, from a standpoint, you're using him to show that. But that character in itself makes no sense that he would know how to do that. The fact that he's a bastard, he would not have even been accepted. He would not have been accepted by the king. His ridiculous rise to power and to fame and fortune, his ridiculous, like the guy, I mean, you talk about Superman being too like, oh, I can't relate to Superman because he's too good. Well, Balian is way too good. I'm not going to sleep with the person I've already slept with and I'm in love with, but I'm not going to marry her because why? Well, I'm just not going to stoop to your level. Bullcrap. I'm not going to sell my soul. How is it selling your soul? You know what I'm saying? Oh, well, they're going to kill him. Well, he deserves to die. You want him dead anyway. You know what I'm saying? It's ridiculous. Again, it makes no sense from a narrative standpoint. The guy is completely unrelatable. I do love that about him. Don't get me wrong. I love that because I would love to be like that. But if you're talking about from a narrative standpoint, the guy doesn't make any sense. Nothing he does makes any sense.
To me, and to me, the reason that
all of a sudden he knows how to defend Jerusalem when he can't even manipulate his knights properly to win a battle. You know what I'm saying? I have to believe. I have the believability factor has to be there for me, and just the reasons you described. I need to see more. I need to see a little more. It's very shallow, like you said. Although there's no character development. Although, like you said, the director's cut does show a lot more character development. It's kind of like how I feel about the director's cut of Batman vs Superman. I felt like,
but like you said, even
was a better movie, made more
even
sense.
The director's cut though was for me, it just wasn't good enough. It was kind of like, okay, so this blacksmith is the jack of all trades and a super warrior. No, he's it
right. Oh, he comes in and just wins the heart of everybody, including the princess. He doesn't die in his ridiculous charge at Carrick. Oh, but he doesn't die because, he didn't kill the one guy. No, he didn't. Why didn't he die in the battle? It was ridiculous. It was suicide. Everybody told him it was suicide, and he did it anyway. You know what I'm saying? Ridiculous. And then you want to make this guy the defender of Jerusalem when everybody else is fleeing? Oh, I'm going to stay and defend Jerusalem. Yes, Balian did, but he didn't. The actual Balian would have known how to defend something because he had fought in battles and been trained in it. This guy, like all of a sudden, he can figure out how to work ballistae and have all these weird defense, strategies, and it's like, no, he wouldn't have.
And that's really one reason why you can't make the protagonist too much like us when it comes to our status. Right.
Exactly.
Like, oh, he's just a blacksmith. Like, it's like, no, he's not. no,
he's not a noble who was trained in war would have made more sense.
Exactly.
It just simply would have. It'd been like the Warrior King, or the one that Netflix just put out about Robert the Bruce, which again, even that wasn't super historically accurate, but at least it makes sense because he was a king. He was a lord who was trained in battle. You know what I'm saying? He's a perfect one. No, is he perfect? No, but that makes sense. Even William Wallace. See, that's another. They do that in Braveheart as well. William Wallace was a lord. He wasn't just some commoner. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
The commoner has to rise up and be better than the lords and show the lords what it's like to be, because the commoner there, that's where the everyman guy. No, bullcrap. Doesn't make any sense. And this guy, Balian, the real Balian, could have defended Jerusalem because he would have been trained to. This guy, he couldn't have defended Jerusalem. Bullcrap. They would have been taken out right away. That doesn't make any sense. He's a Mary Sue.
Yep.
Even though I loved his speech at the end where he knights everybody and they're like, just because you make a man a knight doesn't mean he fights better. It's like, yeah, I mean, I love that. I do love that. I won't lie. Gave me chills because we all want to feel that way. Like, yes, if I'm a knight, then I'm going to fight differently because there's this iconic view of knighthood. You know what I'm saying? But that's ridiculous too. Yeah. It's retarded. It's like, no, it wouldn't have worked. But anyway, overall, I did enjoy the movie. I wouldn't say it's my favorite movie of all time. And upon rewatching, I did just rewatch it. And I like it.
Well, after hearing all you just said, I changed my 2 stars to a 1 star.
Well, I mean, from a writer's standpoint, because I do have to write, and I'm not saying I'm perfect. I'm sure people will pick apart my stories as well and be like, well, you should have done this, and this doesn't make sense. But for narrative's sake, sometimes we do things that don't quite make sense to fulfill a specific narrative or a specific dramatic event that we want to happen, and that's true. But this just doesn't make sense. And if it's not going to be historically accurate, which there are some events that are historically accurate, like the Siege of Kerak and the raiding, but raiding was a part of history. Yeah. Everybody did it.
Yeah.
This whole thing that the Templars were terrible because they were raiding, well, that was normal. People raided all the time.
Yeah, that was
part of warfare.
Was strategy.
Yeah. So that's ridiculous in itself. But if you're going to tell the story, either tell it historically accurate or tell a better story. That's my whole thing. It's like, I did enjoy it. So for that, I give it 2 stars, 2.5 stars at least. But 2 stars at least, 2.5 stars probably, because I did enjoy it. And the visuals were stunning. The fight scenes were entertaining, and I was entertained at the end of the day. But if I didn't know, if I wasn't a Christian who really loved the Crusades, I wouldn't have been as upset as I was, But if you're not a Christian and you're watching this film, not only will you, it is propaganda, and you're going to go away thinking all Christians are bad, but it's probably your view anyway. Religion is bad. Not all Christians, but religion is bad. That's really what it is. Religion is bad. In any shape or form, religion is bad. That's probably the underlying theme I think that I got through this.
Well, I think when you think about the time that it happened after 2001 or 9/11, when you look at it, what came across out of that is that God wills it. God wills it. God will. Yeah. They're screaming. They're fanatic. They're the same as the Muslims. So really, it's religious fanaticism.
I think you could say that a lot of the reasons why it was put out that way was because that was really right along the time when Bush was going to war over there, and people were likening it onto a crusade. So you can honestly see how this is political propaganda against that. The Bush's view of we're going to go to war with them. That they're likening it unto these Christian fanatics attacking these peaceful Muslims, that we're doing the same thing.
For all of you Christians scratching your heads wondering why 2 planes crashed into your buildings and killed 3,000 of your brothers and sisters, here's a movie for you to tell you how horrible you guys all were. Like
That's right.
a thousand
We
years
deserve to have our buildings destroyed.
And we're not going to give you context of 400 years of being having Christian bodies piled up and put in slaves and all that other stuff.
We're just terrible. All Christians are terrible. All white people are terrible. All Europeans are terrible. All Americans are terrible.
We don't want you to have a true shot out of the slingshot.
Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this. I'm sure we've offended a few people, but that's life. The reality of it is that I personally believe that if you're going to tell a historical story, tell it accurately. You can take some liberties, I get that, but don't take so much liberties that you literally change the meaning of what happened. And don't try to force your political ideology on history.
And we will accept an apology from Ridley Scott.
You owe us an apology, Ridley Scott.
You have 48 hours.
But anyway, we do love you guys, and we weren't trying to offend anybody, but there's a reality too. You just can't change and appropriate history like that. It just doesn't work that way. It's not the best way to do things.
We're not going to let you.
No,
we're watchdogs.
And if it's and it goes
and
right
if you
down to
do,
racial,
we're gonna have a podcast about you. And we're going to talk about you.
But again, it goes right down to you not only can't changing the narrative, but you can't change the racial, cultural identity of the people and characters either. You know what I'm saying? And I think that's another part of this whole trying to change the narrative is not only are we going to change the views to a postmodernist view, we also want to change the culture of the people. Thankfully, he didn't do that in this, but I've seen him do it in other films or other people do it in other films. We're going to make this person, a Spanish guy or an Asian dude or whatever. You know what I'm saying? Because we want to change we want to change the narrative into this idea that everything is just multicultural. Well, it's not. Everything isn't multicultural.
And that's not cool, because what if the dude identifies as a girl?
Right, there you go.
This day and age is just not fair to anybody.
It may have been a girl. Why not make it a girl?
Right.
There you go. But that wouldn't be historically accurate because it wouldn't have let a woman do that. But, we have Mulan for that. The new Mulan will change the narrative, I'm sure, of Mulan even more so than it did in the cartoon to fit a narrative of, feminism. And but anyway, I digress. It's just this, I want to put that into context that what we're talking about is that's what we're trying to say. You can't just rob history and change it into what you want it to be so that you can minimize somebody else's, some other cultural view or cultural impact and replace it with yours so that it makes more sense to you. That's fine. If you want something that makes more sense to you, then watch a movie that has to do with something culturally that makes sense to you. I obviously, if I'm an Islamic person, I might not want to or care about the new movie, The Two Popes. You know what I'm saying? It doesn't make sense to me because I don't care about the Pope. But what an Islamic person shouldn't do is change it to two imams instead. You know what I'm saying? Or the imam and the Pope. Because it doesn't work. Tell a story about an imam. Tell a story that directly relates to your culture. And I think that's what I have a real huge problem with. When you're trying to change historical narrative to fit into what you want it to say, it just doesn't work. And if you don't agree with the story, then tell one you want to tell. Tell a story about a character you identify with. If you don't like the Crusades, then talk about something else. If you don't want to talk about the Civil War because you're an African American and it's all about slavery, which I can understand that, then don't tell a story about, don't make a movie about the Civil War or make a movie about slavery, or like the new movie, what's that new movie that just came out?
12 Years a Slave.
No. That's a great movie. But the
Django Unchained.
No, it's a great movie, but it's not even remotely accurate. No, the one about the woman, the Underground Railroad.
Harriet Tubman.
Fantastic film, very historically accurate. There's nothing. I think that's amazing. And I've watched a lot on that about how historically accurate it is, and it's very historically accurate. Great, absolutely awesome. Now, we wouldn't want to change that narrative, though, would we? You know what I'm saying? Or change the narrative to fit to our postmodernistic view of how Harriet Tubman handled that. Oh, well, she used a gun. So? You know what I'm saying? well, we have to turn her into a peace-loving person who doesn't believe in war, into a pacifist. You know what I'm saying? No, she wasn't a pacifist. Wouldn't make sense. So it's the same kind of thing. We don't want to change that narrative historically. Just tell the story, for better or for worse, all the good, all the bad. Just tell the story. We would rather have that so that we can not make the mistakes of the past, but also appreciate the good. You know what I'm saying? Be able to elevate people for the good they've done and acknowledge the mistakes and not make them ourselves. That's the whole point of telling these stories. Anyway, hopefully we didn't offend anybody, but if we did, oh well, life goes on. I don't know how much of this I'm going to cut out. All right, love you guys, and hopefully you enjoyed this episode, our first ever movie review from a specific standpoint. Yeah, from Hollywood Manipulation. We're going to do some more.
I gave it 1.5 stars.
He gave it 1.5 stars.
I just want that on record.
I give it 2.5 stars. Overall, I enjoyed the film, even though it was completely historically inaccurate. And
I enjoyed it until I just talked to you. Now I hate it.
Well, hopefully you hate this film too after listening to our No. I mean, if you enjoyed this film, great, absolutely enjoy it. But don't think that that's the way the Crusades happen. Actually, read a book. If
you enjoyed this film, you should feel ashamed of yourself.
Obviously, I own it, so I did enjoy it. But I do think that if you think this is the way it happened, actually go read about it, go study it, and don't just go look at some liberal professor who wants to change the narrative. Find people who are actually telling you the story, that actually care about the truth behind it, liberal or otherwise. You know what I'm saying? Just go out there and find out the truth when it comes to this kind of stuff. All right, God bless you guys. The website, again, we're still working on it. We're probably going to be changing it from thechristiansages.com to something else because I'm kind of wrapping all of our endeavors up into one kind of IP. But you will be able to find the Christian Sages on this website. But I'm needing to come up with a name, and we're moving to a different platform. So all that's still going in the process. But eventually you'll be able to find us. You can still find us at the Christian Sages on YouTube. You can find us and reach us at the Christian Sages on Facebook. So if you'd like to catch us up, we have a Twitter account as well, although I don't think we've put much up on there because we're still just kind of getting started. Eventually we'll have an Instagram page, but for right now, you can contact us at thechristiansages@gmail.com. You can contact us on YouTube by leaving a comment, but please like and subscribe if you enjoy our content, and you can find us on Facebook. Love you guys, and have a great night.
Good night.
Good night.